Hello, everyone, and welcome. There are a lot of people that are waiting in the waiting room, so we're just going to give 1 minute and then get started. I am so grateful to have so many of our press colleagues here. My name is Aisha Berenblatt, and I am the CEO of Remake. I am really pleased to be moderating today's conversation, which is about the passage of Senate Bill 62, the Garment Worker Protection Act. I have some wonderful colleagues, Carrie from Reformation and Sanjeev from Cytex. The premise of today's conversation is to really focus on how the business community, both brands and manufacturers, and a growing community of these businesses support the passage of the Garment Worker Protection Act. I'm going to have our wonderful panelists introduce themselves in a second here, but what I would love, just a quick housekeeping, is for our press colleagues to add the publication or outlet that you represent, so that as we're calling on you, we'll be able to know which paper or publication you represent. So if you can just change your Zoom name, not just to your name, but your outlet, that would be wonderful. The second is to know that we are recording this conversation. That's because there was a lot of press interest and a few folks had conflicts, but we're hoping to listen and watch after and be able to quote our panelists. So this is being recorded. For those of us just joining, welcome. We have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, I'm Aisha Berenblatt, the CEO of Remake. Remake is a San Francisco-based advocacy organization that's focused on building a more transparent and accountable fashion industry. For this year, one of our strategic priorities is getting the Garment Worker Protection Act to pass. This landmark legislation, if anything, will get California closer to where the industry is headed when it comes to abolishing piece rate and assuring multilateral accountability. For those of you who have attended a few of our press conferences, you may know that we have centered the voices of garment makers, the garment worker center, because this is really a for worker, by worker bill. But today's conversation is slightly different in that we are centering business voices. So with that, Sanjeev, I will turn it over to you in 30 seconds, if you may, to please introduce yourself to our colleagues.
Sure. Morning. My name is Sanjeev Bal. I was fortunate to found a company called Cytex 20 years ago, an organization which is very purpose-driven and values itself for conducting itself morally and ethically.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sanjeev, and welcome. I'd say the one thing, why we're really excited to have Sanjeev here is outside of having a long history of manufacturing in Vietnam, Cytex is now set up here in California and a strong supporter of the bill. So we really value your perspective here today, Sanjeev. Carrie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Fryman-Perry, and I'm the Director of Sustainability at Reformation. In my role at Reformation, I direct our sustainable supply chain and work to develop new ways to incorporate sustainability across all of our business practices. So our team works on programs that range from supply chain, social and environmental responsibility, material sourcing, innovation and traceability, and operational efficiencies. For some context on the brand, Reformation was founded in 2009 and is a lifestyle brand that proves fashion and sustainability can coexist. At Reformation, we believe the key to creating a more sustainable fashion community is to continue to innovate, make fair labor and the environment a priority, be transparent, and to hold ourselves accountable. So sustainability is at the core of everything we do, and we've made significant efforts to reduce our impact by focusing on low impact materials, reducing our carbon footprint, and really pushing to understand who made our clothes at every level of the supply chain so we can continue to push for continuous improvement. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation around SB62.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Carrie. Within Remake, we have a community of change makers that are very much a fan of Reformation. Reformation is an approved brand within Remake's directory, and we are so happy to have you as a brand voice in strong support of this bill. Last but not least, I wanted to welcome up my colleague Elizabeth to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. In particular, special thanks to Sanjeev from Cytex and Carrie from Reformation. It's so wonderful to have business voices in this conversation. I'm an author, a journalist, and as of recently, I am now the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Remake, and I also head up the Pay Up Fashion Coalition. I'm the coordinator of that coalition, and a big part of our work is really looking at how to strengthen human rights and labor rights in the fashion industry to support the growing number of consumers around the world who really want to buy ethical products and support values-driven companies. And also looking at really key pieces of legislation like SB62 that evens the playing field for responsible business and increases accountability for brands, because that's clearly where the international community is going on human rights. And we really want to see the United States lead the way in this conversation instead of be sort of behind the 8 ball. So I'll turn it back over to you, Aisha.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, let's get right to it. Sanjeev, you have just set up a manufacturing facility here in California. I'm curious, as you set up your business and we're coming out of COVID, why did you decide to support SB62?
Well, firstly, I think, let me just take a step back before I take a step forward. I was pretty appalled and shocked when I was exposed to the stark realities, with how business is conducted. I've spent most of my life manufacturing overseas, and I thought we dealt with modern day slavery in different parts of the world where people were taken advantage of, maybe for different reasons, poverty being top on the list. But I got to tell you, I was completely shocked when I got here to understand that traces of modern day slavery exist over here as well. And the argument against it has been so superficial and unjustified that it kind of propelled me to prove and debunk this theory to a great extent, as far as we could as manufacturers, because I just cannot believe that people could be treated unfairly in an unjust manner, and taken advantage of in a modernized environment that we live in today.
Thank you, Sanjeev. And Carrie, how about you from a brand perspective? Why did you decide to be very vocally in support of SB62?
So Reformation's mission is to bring sustainable fashion to everyone. We're responsible for creating safe, healthy, and equitable working conditions for our teams and the garment workers throughout our supply chain. And supporting SB62 is in line with Reformation's ethos, centering sustainability and dignity for the people that make our clothes. So it was a really easy decision for us, especially as an LA-based brand who manufactures approximately 40% of our total production in the Los Angeles area. And we also have our own vertically integrated factory. So we support this bill to improve working conditions and the well-being of garment workers in California, which is home to America's largest garment manufacturing sector.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carrie. Sanjeev, I wanted to come back to something you said around, mostly manufacturing overseas and being shocked when you saw what the conditions are like here in California. Why do you think sweatshops are so pervasive in California? What do you think the root cause is?
Well, there's several factors that point in one direction eventually. So it's not just one thing that contributes to the current state. I feel exploitation due to probably legalization of people here in the state has probably allowed different practices to take place that allows businesses to take advantage of that gray area and pay people less than minimum wage. Now, I got to tell you this, offshore, wherever we operate in Vietnam, for example, there's no way you can pay people below minimum wage. There's nothing like, a dual system where you could pay somebody piece rate, which could be, lower than the minimum wage. What the government of Vietnam says, no matter what, you give them piece rate, hourly rate, whatever it is, this is the minimum wage. You got to pay minimum wage, period, the end. So this gray area over here is allowing people to get exploited. Like I said, it could be for legalization or the lack of it. Could be for I mean there are poor people here too. So again, I mean I haven't been able to put my finger on it if there's just that one thing or two things. But human tendency has always been to take advantage of people. And that's why we have a lot of disadvantaged people on this planet. And I think this is an opportunity for those kind of people to maximize their greed. And that's something which, we all have to be cognizant of, and to create a mechanism to not only protect it, but also to prevent it.
Great, thank you. So you touched upon a very important piece of the bill, which is to say, and this is really important, I think, for press to understand, that the bill is not in any way doing away with productivity targets, but much like is par on the course when it comes to manufacturing globally, it's to say you can have the productivity targets, but minimum wage is minimum wage, and you have to pay that minimum wage and then set up the incentives on top of that. And today, because piece rate is really the way that the industry is set up, the average garment maker is taking home something between $2.68 to $5 an hour. And this is a bill that's going to close that loophole. Carrie, you've been in California for a while. I'm curious from your perspective, why is it that there is such a pervasive sweatshop environment in the state of California?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, we live in a time where fast fashion is as prevalent as ever. And to keep up with demands and maintain profitability, many retailers look to have their garments made cheaply, unfortunately, at the disadvantage of workers who, as you said, very well might receive below minimum wage. And especially in LA, we often see workers being paid piece rate. So I think we're also dealing with large gaps in labor laws that frankly just don't match the current working conditions. So, despite the 1999 Assembly Bill, AB 633, that really sought to end wage theft, garment workers still have little recourse over wage theft. And when I think there's that real lack of regulation from the industry at large, as well as the government, it's really up to each brand to hold themselves accountable. So all these things are kind of compounding and leading to workers rarely having a voice over poor working conditions. So I think it's a mix of different things.
Great. So, there isn't really a level playing field. Most brands have to sort of figure this out for themselves, which means without a lack of regulation, brands can essentially exploit the piece rate system and benefit from it because we have so many fast fashion brands operating in California. Elizabeth, I wanted to bring you into the conversation, knowing that the American Apparel Footwear Association and the California Chamber of Commerce have come out in opposition of this bill. And I would love to hear your thoughts on how their stance does not fully reflect the business community perspective here in California.
Yeah, thank you for that, Aisha. I think that, based on the outreach that I've done to AFA members, I think that the idea that even big business is in opposition to the bill is overstated and quite frankly might be fabricated. Based on the outreach that I've done to AFA members, it doesn't appear that many of their members were even notified before the trade body came out in opposition. I'd also like to add to that we have had some big companies clarify their position on SB62, and while they haven't endorsed, they have pointed out that they are not in opposition. In some cases, we're not even aware that this trade group had spoken out against this very, very basic and fundamental piece of legislation to end wage theft in California. So just to give some examples, Patagonia did get back to us and say that they are not opposed to SB62 and that the AAFA statement is not representative of our company's position. And Adidas likewise says that they are not involved or engaged in any lobbying related to this proposed legislation. So for press that's here, I would really ask everyone, if you're working on stories connected to SB62, continue to reach out to brands who are members of these organizations, because it really is that our understanding that even these trade associations that often reflexively issue statements in opposition to labor rights laws doesn't actually reflect the industry's position. And then the other thing I just wanted to highlight, and Carrie and Sanjeev, you both said it very wonderfully, but how sort of retrograde opposition to this bill is, and how much it really diverges from evolving international norms on labor and human rights. For example, the AFA opposition letter said that brands have, quote unquote, no control over finances in factories. This has been debunked and established over and over and over again. You know, if reporters are looking for information on this, the US Department of Labor did an investigation into California factories and found that brands are often paying 73% less than they would need to for factories to pay a minimum wage. The other thing is that in Germany and France, we already have due diligence. EU is about to establish mandatory human rights due diligence. The notion that brands somehow have no control over what happens in factories is so outdated, and quite frankly, it's embarrassing that an American trade association would even take this position. And I hope that these groups think about the statements that they're putting out and change their stance, because we really want to see the United States become a leader in ethical, sustainable business, when right now we're quite frankly reflecting views that haven't really been popular for decades.
Great. Thank you for that, Elizabeth. And I know we do have some journalist colleagues that have covered the story of the opposition from AAFA and Cal Chamber. And so it sounds very much as the takeaway here is to please go back to brands to get them to clarify their position, as we have done with Adidas and Patagonia. They don't produce in California, so they hadn't taken a perspective on the bill, but very much are not in opposition. And so for the AAFA very much to use their membership to come out in opposition. Hopefully we have debunked that here. One of the things, you know, Sanjeev and Carrie, that's often the party line as well, you know, anything to do with labor protections might hurt business. And I'm curious, I'll start with you first, Carrie, in terms of you having taken a perspective as Reformation and supporting this bill. What do you see as benefits to your business should this bill pass?
Such a great question. Yeah, so I think, you know, the fashion industry as a whole is in need of some serious systematic overhaul. And in order to create the meaningful change that's necessary, you know, passing bills like SB62 is necessary. So I think these regulations could help establish a new standard of compliance and help drive decision-making for the industry at large. You know, SB62 would also help make ethical sourcing the norm in Los Angeles, and I believe help the local manufacturing industry and its workers thrive. You know, since brands would also have to ensure compliance with all California wage and hour laws and regulations, it would also benefit brands like Reformation. It would give us more opportunities, you know, to collaborate with other brands, to work together towards ensuring factories are providing healthy and safe working conditions for the men and women, you know, who make our clothes. And additionally, I think Elizabeth touched on it. I think it could also, you know, reestablish California, you know, as the epicenter of ethical manufacturing. And hopefully this would also inspire similar legislation around the world too. So I think that there's a lot of benefits for businesses.
So you really see this as leveling the playing field to an extent. Let's have a little bit of fun, shall we? So I have some of the opposition's talking points around why they don't support this bill, myths, if you will. And I thought it might be quite fun for us to debunk some of those positions. And so, Sanjeev, one of the first bits that come up time and time again from the opposition is that SB62 is a job killer. It's going to put employers in the industry who've already been suffering because of the financial crisis of the pandemic out of business, or it's going to force them to move their operations out of California. What would you say to that, to those talking points?
These are the same people who pay $20 an hour to the babysitters, right?
Right.
Okay, so here's the deal, right? I think in manufacturing, you have to be productive. When you start talking about $14 an hour or $15 an hour, and you compare it to Vietnam or any other place, a third world country which has $2, $3 an hour, $4 an hour, whatever it may be, it sounds a lot. But factories globally in the third world countries have played the labor arbitrage card. And the labor arbitrage card has led to a lack of innovation and a lack of investment in modernized mechanisms that would correspond to a high level of efficiency. So as an organization, what we did about 5 years ago, we started incubating technology which revolved more around artificial intelligence, robotics, basically industry 4.0 standards to manufacture a pair of jeans. So we honed this mechanism, and listen, this is something which we haven't invented. It's available everywhere in the world. It's just, you just have to have a heart and a will to assemble it and put it under one roof. And that's exactly what we did here in Los Angeles. And the results are quite interesting. To manufacture 1,000 jeans a day, in Vietnam, it takes 250 human beings to do that. With the modernized technology and the investments that we made here in Los Angeles, we are achieving 1,000 jeans a day with 125 to 130 people. So clearly, we have managed to reduce the footprint by 50%. That allows us to be competitive even at $14, $15 an hour, right? Now, when you talk about artificial intelligence and robotics, the first pushback I get is, oh, you're displacing labor. It's quite to the contrary. You're training labor to the next level of engineering that should exist in modern manufacturing landscapes. And two, you're creating an equal opportunity for people to get respectable jobs, which are sustainable, right? Now, as we continue to innovate and work more closely with futuristic technology, and I'm talking more about artificial intelligence than anything else over here, the model of predictability that we are setting up coexists into the sales engine of the brands that we work with. Now, what does that allow? It allows just-in-time manufacturing, similar to what Toyota does. It cuts down lead times, and it minimizes inventory cash challenges. There's also, if anything, 2020 taught us, it has completely disrupted global supply chains. We live in a world of inflationary trends today. You can't ship anything for the love of God today on time. It's taking, just to put things into perspective, right? When we talk about cost, pre-pandemic, the cost of air freight per kilogram from the Far East to the United States was, I would say, on a given day, about $2.50 a kilogram. Today, it's anywhere between $9, $10, $11, whatever anybody wants to make up. Nobody's talking about those costs, right? The cost of a container, a 40-foot container, a year and a half ago was $2,500. Today it's $11,000. Nobody's talking about that. When you ship goods from overseas, there's a 17.5, 18% duty factor. Nobody's talking about that. So when you start correlating a global reality with inefficiencies that businesses have corresponded and accumulated over a period in time, $15 an hour is may not be for a lot of these fast fashion brands who retail their stuff at $9, $10, $15, whatever. But organizations like Reformation and several like them, it gives them a great opportunity to stay, stay with the American labor. I have a dear friend, Dave Mullen at Save Khaki. He's championed American labor from the day he started the brand. And, I've learned so much from him in the past few months that it also inspires me to continue on this path, to keep on creating new methodologies to service it in a sustainable manner over the long haul. So, my thing to people who keep on talking about cost, they got to start putting it into perspective and start looking at it from a productive and efficient standpoint to a business, rather than marginalizing labor and blaming labor for that extensive cost that they accumulate. And while they sit in these little glass houses and white picket fences, and like I said, pay $20 to a babysitter an hour, but when they go out to talk, they don't have the guts to pay people who put bread on their table for $15 an hour. For me, what I would say, shame on you.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for putting that in perspective in terms of, it's not a zero-sum game, that the only way for California to be competitive is shaving off and pushing on labor continually. And that you, as someone who is investing heavily in California, are able to, through research, innovation, and I'm really glad you brought up the shipping piece of this, knowing how many disruptions we've seen during the pandemic. Carrie, another myth that has come up is that brands have little to no control over the payroll of garment factory employees. So it's to say, if there's wage theft, well, we as a brand have no control over payroll, so it's not our fault. I'm curious how you debunk that myth for us.
Yeah, so brands actually have undue influence on the wages paid downstream to garment workers. And in fact, exploitative brand purchasing practices are often, at the heart of the problem. So brands routinely price their orders so low that factories will often skirt labor laws in order to receive or maintain contracts and retain profit margins in this race to the bottom. So I think brands really need to understand how their purchasing practices can negatively impact workers in their supply chain. So practices, like low purchase prices, unfair penalties, poor payment terms, can really undercut a factory's ability to ensure decent working conditions, especially when so many factories in California are struggling financially already. So, I would say poor purchasing practices, can really increase that use of unauthorized subcontracting as a way of cutting costs. And this is one of the ways that many brands today get away with wage theft. At Reformation, though we expect our suppliers to strive to meet our requirements and demonstrate a commitment to our core values, we recognize that this is also a collaborative approach with our suppliers, and it takes two-way communication. So we're really committed to continuously improving our responsible purchasing practices. And what I would say to the opposition in this is, once hopefully the bill passes, they should really participate in the Better Buying Initiative to understand their purchasing practices. And I hope that, this legislation will really push the understanding that brands can negatively impact working conditions and facilities.
Thank you, Carrie, for touching upon a key piece in this, which is to say the prices brands set and their purchasing practices directly result in what a worker's take-home pay is. And so the fact that we have so much pervasive wage theft is because of the prices that these fast fashion brands are paying. And so to Sanjeev's point, well, what kind of an industry does California want to be? And attracting, businesses like yours and Sanjeev's at this point, there's, I believe, 140 strong endorsers of the bill. We'll drop the full list in the chat for press to take a look. One of the things that I'm struck by is how this is a next generation of entrepreneurs, often people of color, women, sustainable businesses who are here to say California can have the innovation, the technology, and a thriving ecosystem. But we have to talk about purchasing practices and the liability that brands should be held accountable for if that results in wage theft. I'm going to do one more Mythbuster and then open it up to press for questions. So if you have questions, please do raise your hand, then we can unmute you and take that. Elizabeth, one of the myths that I've heard is there are a handful of bad actors here in California that are to blame for the sweatshops plaguing the industry. So what would you say to that? Because I think the party line is, well, there's a handful of bad actors. Why do we need more regulation? Because things aren't that bad.
Right. I mean, I wish that were true, that there were just a handful of bad actors, but we know that wage theft in Los Angeles is endemic and that it's been going on now for over 2 decades. I actually have a book on my bookshelf that came out in the year 2000. I think it's called Behind the Label, that is about sweatshops and wage theft in Los Angeles. This has just been going on for far too long. The other thing that I would say about that argument is that the Garment Worker Restitution Fund, which was established, I think, in 1999 to pay out wage theft claims to garment workers, it's often overwhelmed with hundreds of cases every year, garment workers trying to get paid back, right? So what that means is that it's often California taxpayers who are having to backfill this fund and fill in these gaps in wages that are owed to garment workers that really start with the purchasing practices of big brands. I mean, this has been in the press a lot, but it's really big companies. Wage theft has been leaked to Ross Dress for Less, Forever 21. So it really just is an outrageous system that these hugely profitable companies are not currently jointly responsible for wage theft. So it's just not true that it's a handful of bad actors. We know that from investigations into Los Angeles factories that more than 80% of garment workers in LA have unfortunately experienced wage theft. And one other thing that I want to say about that is you really have to kind of do the mental calculation of what that's meant for the communities that have experienced this for the last 2 decades. That means, our garment workers in LA are mostly immigrant women of color. That's millions of dollars that these communities have been robbed of. And you have to think about the small businesses in their communities that have not been supported because they're not getting paid enough. You have to think about the fact that garment workers are struggling to put, their children into school, to put food on their table, and really what this community has lost over the years because they are simply not getting paid what they are legally owed.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for touching upon how this really has been a pervasive concern within California, but here we have an opportunity to essentially put an end to it. I now wanted to invite any press colleagues, if you would, we'd love to see you. Turn your camera on.
Aisha, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. And please do forgive me for this interruption, but I just have a quick point to make.
Yes.
So while we are talking about this wage theft, there's another big underlying issue over here, which we need to confront. It's habit and mentality. So if your habit is to take shortcuts, and if your mentality is to persecute and take advantage, then it's not just labor, you're going to take advantage of other things as well simultaneously, because that's a habit. And we all saw what happened at Rana Plaza, right? Unfortunately, we saw what happened in Miami recently. So my concerns go well beyond just, the wage theft. I think there's another, we don't talk about preventive measures to be taken for people who have made taking shortcuts a habit. I've seen some infrastructure here. Fortunately, currently, I don't see large, tall buildings over here, bustling with manufacturing activity right to the 20th floor. Thank God for that. but I've seen some facilities which are shocking.
Mhm.
You know, so you know, even housing these workers um, in terrible facilities is life-threatening. God forbid you have you know, a fire or whatever. You know,
Yeah.
that's when everybody will wake up and, you know, start talking about the infrastructure here like they did in Bangladesh. So I think it's better to get proactive and get things sorted out before we have some other unforeseen circumstance, which could be very disturbing.
I appreciate that, Sanjeev, because you know the inhumane pace of production in shoddy buildings, these are all other cost-cutting measures, right? So wage theft is just one piece of the puzzle. So questions from press, and if you're willing to turn your camera on, or at least as you introduce yourself, what publication you write for, please go ahead. There's a question that's come in here around another frequent pushback from opposition, which is that the problems in California right now are about enforcement, not liability. And the bill is really honing in on liability. So I'll start with you, Carrie, on what you would say to that.
Sure. So, you know, I feel like the industry still very much operates on a race to the bottom. You know, as we talked about, many of today's brands want to pay extremely low prices to manufacture goods and yet have no accountability despite benefiting from sweatshop wages. So I feel like we can't end wage theft with customer pressure and enforcement alone. We need our laws to protect workers, not just the bottom line of brands. You know, the industry, brands, and government need to come together to create a race to the top to protect workers throughout the supply chain. And joint liability is one way to get to the root cause of the issue. And SB62 is part of that effort. I think joint liability, you know, can really help contribute and raise awareness to the industry-wide change that is desperately needed around the improvement of purchasing practices, so brands can take accountability and actually support suppliers in providing decent working conditions.
Thank you.
May I also add on that, Aisha? Yeah, I think the other important thing to note is that we already have enforcement of wage theft. There's already a garment worker restitution fund, but currently the fund can't keep up with demand because wage theft is such a pervasive problem. And the reason why it continues to be a pervasive problem is because this loophole has existed for the last 20 years that doesn't really get to the root cause of wage theft, which is when brands don't pay enough to support the cost of production in the factories. So we already do have enforcement, which is, you know, the really a big part of the reason why SB62 is making sure we evolve labor standards to address the brand liability part of the problem.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I mean, what you're essentially saying is currently California taxpayers are picking up the cost because brands' prices aren't enough to make workers whole. And what this bill and the liability piece is doing is assuring that brands are held liable for their purchasing practices, because otherwise we're not going to get to the root cause. And that's so important. Questions? Go ahead.
I hope you were pointing to me. I'm Kate Shimura. I'm with Sourcing Journal. Hi, Sanjeev. Hi, Aisha. I know we've spoken in the past. So my question is for Elizabeth. I thought what you had to say about the industry opposition to SB62 being overblown was really interesting, especially from large brands and companies. Why do you think that industry trade groups like the AAFA are taking a stance on behalf of their members that doesn't necessarily reflect their true feelings? And I know that you mentioned some of those companies, but, you know, is there anyone that you would recommend that we reach out to who might be willing to kind of take an opposing stance?
I mean, those are both really good questions. I'm I'm happy to send you a list of the brands that we've done outreach to, because I'm hoping that more of them in the days to come get back to us and clarify their position. My recommendation is to go through the membership, and especially brands that really kind of take a position typically on corporate social responsibility really do need to speak out and be clear about where they stand. I can't, I would actually like to know what Sanjeev and Carrie think about this. My understanding of these trade associations is that they kind of are in this habit of putting out a reflexive opposition to any labor rights bill. It's almost like there's not an understanding of how much the business community itself has evolved to incorporate sustainable and ethical business practices. It very much represents an old school, outdated mentality that just does not reflect younger brands, up and coming, fast growing businesses. But what I can say for sure is that based on the research that I've done into AAFA's members is that most of them didn't even know that this group had put out an opposition statement. So I just don't think that it actually reflects, I don't think that there is some solid big business opposition to this bill. And I think that that's overblown.
Anything to add there, Sanjeev and Carrie?
Well, we're not part of any industry association, so
I see.
I don't know what goes on in there, so it's hard to comment. But again, I mean, it's different strokes for different. It's not like one size fits all. So I'm sure there are groups of people who would prefer it to be the way it is, and obviously there are a group of people who would not subscribe to that notion. So listen, at the end of the day, it's not about these associations and who subscribes. A waste of time. I think it's really important for to rise above the occasion and look at it from a fair, humane, and just standpoint, and just do the right thing. That's
Sorry, you broke up there for a second, Sanjeev, but I think what you're saying is, you obviously aren't part of these associations, but Kate, I feel like the takeaway here is for you as a journalist to reach out to AAFA or some of these groups to clarify their stance. I'm also putting here in the chat for you the statement we got back from Patagonia, if that is useful as a follow-up. Allison, I'm going to come to you.
Okay. Well, I was just really interested in what Carrie said about collaborating with other brands. Is there a way that well, two things. One is I'd love to hear you and actually Sanjeev talk about what that might look like in the in terms of creating an environment that's more ethically responsible to labor. I also
So the first question, maybe we'll take that, knowing I think there's a few other people lined up. What's it going to take to build a more collaborative environment in the state of California for sustainable businesses to thrive? Carrie, I wonder if you might be able to take that question.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting, the collaboration between brands, we see much more overseas. And in California, brands could collaborate together to reduce audit fatigue. For example, they could invest in management systems, living wage initiatives, and strategies. So, when you share a facility with another brand, we often go to that other brand and have conversations about how we can collaborate to together increase our leverage, and improve the working conditions in the facilities. In California, we haven't had as much opportunity to collaborate. And, I'm not sure if that's due to the brands that are currently manufacturing here. But I do think that when, SB62 passes, hopefully, that there will be a lot more brands out there that are working towards improving their purchasing practices, are more aware of, just having to do third-party assessments and remediation efforts and really get to that root cause. And, we can kind of share our resources together to make those improvements. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. In some ways it goes back to what Sanjeev was saying around, the bottom feeding fast fashion brands want to cut corners. And so perhaps there's less a spirit of collaboration because you're constantly looking to grow the pie, versus for a business like Reformation, whose ethos is more around sustainability, there is more of that interest to collaborate. So if we were to attract a different kind of industry in California, which I'd say the 140 endorsers are very much that next generation, there would perhaps be more of the spirit of collaboration that we currently don't see, which perhaps may be, positive externality that comes from the passage of this bill. So there is a question here, and Elizabeth, I'm wondering if you might be able to take it around the timeline of the bill. I think there's just some confusion because of how opaque, perhaps, especially in COVID, a lot of the different ways that the bill has been moving up through the different committees. And so people wanting to know what are some of the key dates that press should be mindful of as this bill finally arrives on Governor Newsom's desk.
Maybe we can have someone from Garment Worker Center hop in on this one. I mean, the legislative calendar constantly evolves, but right now the bill is in the Assembly. And then I believe, is it in mid-August? Yeah, maybe GWC can clarify this, but the kind of the big part of, or how do I want to put this? When it passes to Governor Newsom's desk, that's really when we need a lot of kind of just lifting up of this piece of legislation.
Great. We have Daisy here from the Garment Worker Center, who's been very intimately involved in the ledge cycle. So Daisy, for press, if you could just point to what are some of the key dates and when do you anticipate the bill arriving on Governor Newsom's desk for signature?
Yeah, hi everybody. So right now the bill is on what's called the suspense file of the Appropriations Committee in the Assembly. The actual vote to move the bill from that committee to the full Assembly will be after August 16th, when legislators return to Sacramento. We don't have the exact date yet. And the full Assembly vote has to happen before, I believe, August 31st, about that date. Then the bill will move on to Governor Newsom, who has about 30 days to sign the bill from September 10th to October 10th.
So we're getting close to sort of the end of the winding down. And so I think the key takeaway here is by August 31st, so end of next month, we should have all the votes in. You feel confident the votes are there. And then the bill arrives at Governor Newsom's desk to sign. Now, Daisy, while I have you here, I know that GWC is having an event on July 28th. I wonder if you could share just a little bit about it. And then I have one more question coming back to Carrie and Sanjeev.
Yeah, garment workers really want to make sure that all, representatives know how important this bill is to them, to their livelihood, to their health and safety. And so garment workers will be joining forces on July 28th, I think 8 a.m. In front of the governor's office in downtown Los Angeles. We'll have more details on that soon and can share out, but hopefully, media can come and cover the story.
Wonderful. So this is July 28th, 8 a.m. outside Governor Newsom's offices. That garment makers will be there to talk about why they support the bill. Thank you, Daisy. There's a question here, Sanjeev, around why did you decide to come to California? Why are you, producing in California, since so much of the opposition talks about should this bill be passed? It's essentially going to have manufacturers flee the state.
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked that several times. A couple of reasons. So the first time I got here to try and manufacture things was about 5 odd years ago, and I found it completely disintegrated. There was no modernization, no real innovation, considering this is the denim capital of the world. So what I could clearly see is that the talent was outstanding. Talent that I'd never seen or had ever got exposed to ever. It was just like poetry in motion. But on the other hand, what I found was a fragmented methodology to manufacturing. And so you had one guy doing the cutting, another guy sewing, another guy washing, a fourth guy finishing. So it was kind of difficult to manage the supply chain. And on the other side, it attributed to a much higher cost. So I clearly saw the opportunity of centralizing all these operations under one roof with a modern element to it. And the more research we did over the years, we found that there's more than one reason, besides being competitive, to set up a plant here. And one key reason was we could see global supply chains. They needed to be connected. So it wasn't only about bringing manufacturing back to the West, and that rhetoric we've all heard for several years with no real formula. But just to have an integrated supply chain, which allowed local development, global production, speed to market, rapid availability, a lower level of inventorization. We saw a lot of benefits from it. And we just tried to assemble the tools, and well, here we are.
So vertical integration, you had touched upon shipping beforehand, competitive advantage, denim capital of the world. So what I'm hearing is there's lots of reasons for why California remains competitive. And you don't.
And another one, I just want to put on record that we haven't gone out for any incentives, and we have not taken advantage of any system over here to make us, more competitive. Let's put it this way, as yet.
Wonderful. We are almost at an hour. I feel like I could speak to all of you forever and ever, but I really did want to thank you, Carrie, Sanjeev, and Elizabeth, for your leadership and your thoughtful remarks and your openness to engage with press today. Before I close out and summarize key takeaways from this conversation, I wanted to see if you have, any closing thoughts, something that I didn't touch upon. Perhaps we just take 30 seconds each to go around with, why this bill is so important for passage and why you think it's key for business community to raise their voices in support of this bill. So, Carrie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, with the past year or so, I think it's, really never been more important for the industry and government to come together to protect and improve working conditions. We all know COVID-19 has really accelerated this need for close and collaborative partnerships between brands and their supply chain partners. And as Sanjeev, touched on, and Elizabeth touched on, this bill is so necessary in California to protect the workers. And it's frankly necessary, in the whole industry. So I really hope that this is going to be the first of many that will be passed throughout the US and internationally.
Thank you, Carrie. Sanjeev?
Yeah, I think we all have a moral compass, and I think every drop counts. Part of a business that operates holistically is to create positive impact. So you have positive environmental impact to contend with, and you have positive social impact as well. So I think more from a social impact standpoint, it's not just about providing 8 toilets to every human being in your factory. It's not about just having proper working hours, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's our moral responsibility also to look and expand our thoughts into the local communities and work in an open sourced environment manner to create, further positive social impact. There's no real measurement for it, but I think from how a business should conduct itself in the 21st century, it's really important to stretch out and participate in a dialogue and contribute wherever there is injustice.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think I'll just, end by saying that the fashion industry, even after COVID-19, most of the big brands returned very quickly to profitability. And globally, we've seen garment workers work through the pandemic without a social safety net. We've seen people die making PPE in factories. At some point in the pandemic, over 77% of garment workers globally were facing food insecurity. And brands, by contrast, they are the most profitable segment of retail. It's the system that we have set up right now really is not working for garment workers. And I think just as a matter of basic fairness, it's time to close these loopholes in our laws and really create a system that works for everyone in fashion, not just for shareholders, not just for executives, but for everyone in the supply chain that brings our clothing to life and really makes this industry what it is.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And so just as we are closing up, I was furiously writing down some of your wisdoms. And, I think a few key takeaways for press is sweatshops today are pervasive in the state of California because of purchasing practices and the prices that brands pay. If we are addressing the minimum wage issue in California, $15 a minimum, we're not really going to get to the root causes unless there is joint liability. There are many businesses, as the ones represented here, over 140 of them, that very much support this bill. We have put the full list in the chat. You're welcome to go speak to these manufacturers and brands who are pushing back on the industry position of this bill being a job killer. California has an opportunity to remain competitive, to be a thriving ecosystem of sustainability, but we really do have to address wage theft, which today is something that taxpayers are having to foot the bill. I'd end here with the calendar that Daisy pointed out means that come August, once this bill has made its passage through all of the assembly, it is arriving on Governor Newsom's desk. We at Remake are very curious in terms of what Governor Newsom thinks and what he would do. And so I would very much encourage press colleagues to contact his office, knowing that the bill is arriving in September, and to ask what his stance is on the bill, and particularly when it comes to joint liability. As Daisy mentioned, there is a garment worker action on July 28th. We'll send more information on that in the recap. On August 12th, Remake is mobilizing its citizen community in Los Angeles, and all press is invited. We are going to be doing a series of postcard writing to Governor Newsom, as well as the first partner, to ask them to support this bill. So I hope you would join us there as well. If you need any follow-up, we will be sure to connect you to the PR folks for Carrie and Sanjeev, and Elizabeth here has dropped her email in the chat as well. Finally, I just tell you all, I know news cycles are constantly running around. I know it's been a busy time. There's so much that we're all grappling with, but especially for those of you whose beat is really around fashion and thinking about the future of the industry, please do keep following up on this bill. We're at the home stretch here, and I hope that you will join me in thanking our colleagues, and I hope to see some wonderful stories coming out of this press conference, and that it's been illuminating for all of you. So Sanjeev, Carrie, and Elizabeth, thank you so very much. Thank you to the Garment Worker Center, and for all of you in attendance. We'll send a recap, and I hope everyone has wonderful Wednesdays. Take good care.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having Reformation, and for all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, appreciate you very much, Carrie. Thank you.
Hi.